Today is Friday, January 29th, 2021. My name is Evan Solis. I'm interviewing David Casas for the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Mr. Casas, that this interview will be placed in the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at UT Austin. If there's anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. If there is something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting. So I'll ask you a series of 5 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. There are 2 questions we need to make sure you agree to before we go on. 1.
Sorry.
No problem. Voces wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the Benson Library at UT Austin. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to Voces. Do you give Voces consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Benson Library?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you grant Voces copyright over the interview and any material you provide?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you agree to allow us to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes.
Thank you. And then 2 other questions. We have many questions in a pre-interview form that you and I have already filled out. We use that information to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server. Before we send that to the Benson, we would have stripped out any contact information for yourself, your family members, so that will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview, that is that pre-interview form, in your public file available to researchers at the Benson?
I'd rather not.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, certainly. Good to know. On occasion, Voces receives requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your email with journalists?
Yes.
Okay, that does it. All right, well, that's done. Thank you, David. So this is, as I mentioned, for our Voices of a Pandemic project, this has obviously been a very strange year for all of us.
Yeah.
So this interview will take sort of a couple segments. And I'd just first like to ask you a bit about your personal life. Can we start just by please giving us some background on who you are? So where you come from, your background, what you do.
Well, very good. Yeah. Well, my parents are Cuban, and they escaped the island with my one sibling, my sister, back in 1970. But when they escaped the island, they went via Spain, and I was born in Spain. I was born in the Canary Islands, which is where they settled after leaving Cuba. And the first 2 years of my life were in Spain. We lived in the Canaries, and we lived in the mainland in Cádiz, and then later in Madrid. And the work that my father was able to find dried up pretty much. He was involved in food service, but for oil industry in the Mediterranean. But because of the energy crisis of the 1970s, that work dried up. And we did have an opportunity at that point to come to the United States. We had one family member, an uncle, and that were here in the Atlanta area. And so our family left Spain. I was 2 years old, and we settled in the Atlanta area. But because of the current administration at that time, which was the Nixon administration, we were permitted to come to the United States as refugees of the Cuban regime. So we had that experience in a sense. We settled in Atlanta. We did have friends. We did have family. But became part of the small Cuban community that was here. Many of them refugees themselves, escaping the communist regime. And we settled in the Decatur area, a suburb of Atlanta. And that's pretty much where I grew up most of my life. My elementary years, and certainly up to middle school. In high school, we kind of transitioned over to Stone Mountain, and then from there till Lilburn. But pretty much that section, eastern suburbs of Atlanta, is where I have grown up. Do I keep going, or? I don't know where my stopping point is.
No, yeah, just keep talk about yourself. Yeah, please.
Okay. Well, so yeah, just grew up the typical immigrant life. My father, who was a medical student in Cuba, was a waiter here, and pretty much till he died. He died when I was 21. That's what he did. Just worked in restaurants. But also we were a very faith-based family. My father felt a call to ministry, and so he founded a church, Spanish-speaking church, and he pastored. So he was pastoring and working in the restaurants until the time of his death. But because of that, we grew up in very poor neighborhoods, really immigrant communities in the Atlanta suburb area. Um, I was able to go to elementary school and involved, get enrolled in public school, but had a difficult time because I just didn't know the language. English wasn't spoken at home. So I didn't make it through first grade. Had to repeat that grade simply because of communication. So I know what it feels like to be in a strange land and to not be able to know the language or understand the language. You do some of it, and you tried to do it at home because you had an older sister. My sister is about 10 years older than I am, so she even had a tougher time because she had to get engaged. But now at the middle school level, um, practically when we got here, so it was tough for her as well. But grew up in that neighborhood and got involved heavily in evangelical ministry because of my father's pastoral role. Started to learn, and my love for just the Spanish community, the Hispanic community, but particularly what had to do with church life and evangelical life. Eventually, as I'm growing up, I'm participating in church, and that's become part of our main life, in a weekly life, you might say. My father being the pastor required me to be part of everything that was going on there. So that had a lot of influence in my upbringing and my forming of my character. Faith in God and certainly love for His word and the scriptures and for evangelical truths, which is quite different because Hispanics are usually a Catholic, a Roman Catholic, but we were definitely in the evangelical route. And even in Cuba, my father, they were already part of a Baptist denomination there. So it wasn't quite a big change for us here, but continuing that. And then of course, love for country, which is typical of Cuban immigrants. Just the love of the United States, the freedoms that the United States give, it started forming me. And I would say a lot of who I am was formed during those years. A lot of what I do now was formed during those years, and just really looking at the world through the lenses of my father and my mother. The stories they would tell me started forming my character in the way that I understood politics, the way I understood government, the role of citizens, and certainly the role of faith in the life of families and of people. Because of that, and when I went to high school, I was enrolled in a private school. My father worked hard to make sure that that happened, and it was a small Christian school that I was part of. And it was really neat to be able to have those years in high school and just start finding yourself and focusing. Got involved in baseball and getting involved in all kinds of activities, and just being able to just be an American kid, growing up, but at the same time in a place where my faith was affirmed. And upon graduation from high school, I just felt called to ministry. So I immediately left for Florida and spent a year there studying for ministry, trying to follow just the call of my life and the examples that have been set for me. But during that time is when my father became sick, and the illness really took a toll on his life. And in '93, he did pass away with cancer. And pretty much it was myself and my mom. My sister had already married and moved on. And I was taking care of my mother at that point. So I decided it was time to go back to college. And it was neat because I was the first of my family ever, even the family that came after us here to the United States on the side of my mother or the side of my father to go to college. So it was neat to be able to pioneer that way. And I eventually graduated from college and graduated with a history degree and started teaching high school and taught high school for about 12 years. Just loved teaching. But at the same time, I was very heavily involved still in the church that my father had started. And I was still, during my 20s, involved there in various capacities, either leading music. I love playing guitar and being part of the song and worship team, to even teaching. And there's where I found my love for teaching, not only at the high school level, teaching civics, but then at the church level, being able to teach doctrine. And it all went along that way. Pretty much my life was teaching and staying involved with church. And I married shortly after, a few years after. But in 2000, got involved in the Bush campaign. And my love for politics, and my wife being political herself, we both being newlyweds, we got involved. But that led, not really involvement in the Bush campaign for 2000, but actually helping a local representative who was running for office at the time. We got involved in his campaign and started building a relationship there. And really during 2000 is where my two worlds met, in just the seeing that politics was something that I enjoyed, and something where I felt I could make a difference. But then at the same time, the call on my life for ministry was very, very strong as well. And so throughout 2000 and 2001, I spent my time trying to figure out, okay, how do these two worlds meet and successfully meet and go forward? But in 2001, because of redistricting, many of the relationships I built in running those campaigns in 2000 kind of came to fruition. They called me and they said, hey, there's a legislative district available and we think you should run. It's an open seat as a result of the census. And in 2002, I ran and I was elected. I elected the first Republican Latino in state politics, which I didn't realize that. I remember when I announced my campaign, it was October 31st of 2001. And had kids trick-or-treating, and we had just moved into our new house, and I had an AJC reporter sitting in my living room wanting to do the profile because I had announced. And he was just trying to figure out my background and asking me the same questions and things. And then he just paused for a moment and he said, do you realize that you will be the first Hispanic elected? And I honestly told him that did not cross my mind one bit.
Are you saying in the state of Georgia, the first Hispanic?
In the state of Georgia, the first Hispanic. That's right. And of course, that year, a Democrat counterpart, was elected as well. So we were the first two ever in the state of Georgia in the history of the state. And that really kind of made me understand that this was greater than just wanting to run for office. That this was many ways just being an immigrant family and opening the door, being pioneers to a family that came after. Here I was now in the greater Hispanic community, opening doors in the state of Georgia. So it was really neat during this first few years serving in the state house, teaching high school. And eventually my teaching in high school turned into teaching in seminary. I pursued my master's degrees and then eventually my doctoral degree, and completed my PhD in 2017 in Old Testament and Hebrew. So teaching college and serving in state politics or in state government. It really was my life and what I was doing, and really got involved in the issues of school choice, and got involved in strong issues of fiscal responsibility, and that was just the focus um, of my tenure, my 16-year tenure in the House of Representatives. Politics was always on the horizon, whether I would go for Congress or go for something else, but it just never worked out that way. It was just something that my love for the Spanish community, for the church, kept me grounded. And I've got involved heavily in Spanish ministry here in Georgia, and even my training in seminary teaching has been useful to assist the Spanish community. So I helped found a school of ministry for Spanish-speaking ministers. And it's an undergraduate program, associate's and bachelor's degree, and I lead that. As the president of that ministry, and been teaching there while I also teach in seminary and college, and served in the state house. And when I completed my PhD, I just felt that this was something that I needed to do all the time. And I retired from the state house, and just went back into just a teaching life in the Spanish ministry of Berea, and in Luther Rice as a professor. But then I was called upon to start writing. In 2019, I found myself writing and contributing to something very interesting. There was a project where they wanted to show and be able to write about how people can serve God in their vocations. You don't have to just be a pastor or a priest. You can be someone, you can be a journalist, you can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, you can be a construction worker, and still be fulfilling your vocation and your calling. And so they wanted me to write upon being Christian, being an evangelical, finding mission in politics, which for the Hispanic community, that's very difficult, because politics just doesn't work that way. They don't see it that way because of corruption and so many things that surround it. So I started writing about that, and I just really felt kind of, I wouldn't say it was hypocrisy or hypocritical, but certainly there was a conflict in my mind. I was here writing and telling Hispanics, yes, find your calling and your vocation in politics. And here I was leaving it behind and saying, I don't want anything else to do with it. And it's interesting because it really helped me settle in my mind that my life involves both. That's what my training, my upbringing, everything that has ever happened in my life has led to these two worlds. And being a bridge or a gap, excuse me, to be able to be someone that stands in that gap. Give me just a moment.
Yeah, if you need to get some water, good.
Yeah, no, it's good. I don't know what happened there. Okay. But, being able to stand in that gap and bringing those two worlds together, and being able to, they're not opposites. They're not mutually exclusive. And it's interesting because it was about that time that I got a call from a former colleague in the State House who is now State Director of Americans for Prosperity. And he told me about the LIBRE Initiative. And he said that he was looking for someone here in Georgia to direct it. And he wanted me to help him find someone. And well, after a couple of weeks of that, it ended up being me. And I got involved in the LIBRE Initiative about December of 2019. And really, it really brings it all together. You're in grassroots work in the community, but it doesn't separate from the faith-based side of it. You're caring for people, you're educating people. I mean, just the Latino aspect of it, the education aspect of it, and the political aspect of it. It's like my three worlds came together in one position, the LIBRE Initiative. And so I started there, and we're here working in Georgia to build community. And the things that I've learned in my 49 years of life being able to involve others and invest in others and continue to make an impact in the community. And so that brings it to today.
That is quite a lot of life that you
Yes.
have. Very interesting. You know, it's not everyone who clearly has these poles that seem to be so defined in their life, you know, and the fact that you've been able to bring them together. And there's a lot about that I want to ask you about. Before we start delving more into your history, your professional development, I do want to talk about the specifics of this past year and living in a pandemic for the nature of this project. So, you know, these interviews are going to be available for years and years to come. The hope is that, you know, when we're long gone, folks who are going to be doing research on these times will be able to come and sort of get a different snapshots of what the Hispanic experience was in the US during these times. For the COVID-19 pandemic, can you put yourself a year back in time, and do you remember a moment or something that happened where you suddenly thought to yourself, I think this is going to be a thing. I think this is here to stay. And you started making changes. Was there anything like that you experienced?
Oh, I think there's no doubt about that. You know, at the very onset, you don't have the luxury of being a normal citizen, in a sense that you can say, hey, you know, let's try to figure this out and let's go at it, you know, day by day, or be able to say, well, maybe it won't be as serious as it is, as they say it is. When you're leading a school, or when you're being part of something like that, or you're trying to build community, like with LIBRE Initiative, because I haven't left my teaching position. I'm still doing that. And so, it was early January, and I was definitely involved in travel. We're doing so much traveling with LIBRE, and really trying to get things started here in Georgia. And the first news broke out of the coronavirus, and just being able to monitor it and just see where things were going. And it didn't take long. I remember I was in a conference. I was invited to speak in Cancun, Mexico. And I was part of this conference. And just the day I returned, the following day, the coronavirus restrictions went into place. And it was interesting because as I was getting on the plane from Mexico, the flight attendant, or the person at the gate, asked me and said, have you traveled anywhere in the last 14 days beyond just here, Cancun? I said, no, I've only been here, and I've been at a conference just in the last week. He said, have you been in contact with anyone sick? And I said, no, not that I know of. And it was interesting that these questions were being asked. And I was like, okay, well, this is just the protocols that are start, you know, going, and that's fine. But then the next day, you know, within 24 hours, I'm back in Atlanta, and then 24 hours later, things shut down. Travel is restricted, restaurants are closing, and I'm just, it impacted me in a way, because I was just like realizing, wait a minute, how quickly this has happened. And just the unknowns that are beyond that. This is serious stuff. But like everyone else, I was like, well, you know, if we can hunker down for 2 weeks, you know, we can get this past. You know, we're in flu season, and hopefully this will work out. I think, to your question, what really hit me was when things were not opening up. 2 weeks passed by, and then it was like, give us 2 more weeks. And then those 2 weeks passed by, give us 2 more weeks. Streets are abandoned, you know, no traffic, which I enjoyed that part living in Atlanta, but no traffic, the grocery shelves empty, no toilet paper. And, you know, it was just like, okay, you know, I've seen panics before. And we had one a few years ago when the hurricane, I think it was Katrina, hit the Gulf Coast, and it kind of disrupted the oil. So we've seen panics before. And I was like, being in the legislature, I've been able to see things, at that perspective and to say, okay, there's people in charge of this and give it time. No, I think that I started seeing, the school that I was at or that I'm at cancels graduation, says that's not going to happen. Public schools start shutting down, saying we're not having graduations. That was about May. And that's when it hit me. I said, this is much bigger than it's being portrayed. This is going to have a major impact in our culture. And I think I finally came to that conclusion in June, where just the masks and the investment that was going in and the changes that were going on and people adopting policies and changes. So I would say, it wasn't like immediate, but certainly from the moment that it started in March to the moment that we got to about early June, it all built up for me to get to June and say, this is going to change our lives forever. This is just the way we do things have changed. You don't implement all these changes, and then when things get better, all of a sudden you abandon them. People have gotten used to the fact that they can work from home. People have gotten used to the fact that, hey, I don't have to go and meet you. Why don't we just put on Zoom? I think it's going to be very difficult for folks to go back to restaurants and be served by someone that isn't wearing a mask. To see cooks that are handling food that aren't wearing gloves and masks. just as a normal process of living of the day. I don't think those things are going to change. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm no prophet, but certainly it was at that moment that I said, life is going to be different. Life is going to be extremely different. And for someone that loves to travel and loves to be with people, I knew that those changes were going to be things I had to grapple with and be able to put in perspective. So it was probably about that time.
Yeah, I was going to ask, it seems like you are a person, it seems you're professional, the different facets of your professional career, you're very interactive with people, right? Constantly. Mm-hmm. Has that taken a toll on you? People talk about mental health and the tolls of this past year. Do you think personally, mm-hmm. I mean, how has it been for you adapting at the personal level to the changes required?
I think personally, it's been okay for me. I mean, interestingly enough, I'm an introvert, and I think as someone gave me the title the other day. They said, you're. I think they call them extrovert introverts. Basically, I'm able to speak to people and be involved with people, but there comes a time where I got to be left alone. I got to need my time, and because of that, spending time alone, I actually welcomed it. With my busy life, it was nice not to have to be obligated to go anywhere. It was nice not to have a full agenda. It was nice to have time at home, to spend time with my kids, with my family that I hadn't had before. We were forced to have time together. And for me, I actually saw it as a positive, personally, to be able to catch up on my reading, books I've been putting off, and now I can read because I'm not filling my time up with anything else. The appointments were gone. Social engagements were gone. And so now you were filling your time up with things you've been wanting to do for a very long time. And so I think for my mental health, personally, it was a time of benefit. It was actually a time of growth, to be able to catch up with things and be able to think through things and be able to solidify relationships at home that I hadn't had before. And me and my children and me and my wife, we've grown closer by having this time together. Dad's not always out, but he's at home and we were just doing stuff together. So in that aspect, I see it as a huge positive. And I kind of dread going back to normal because I've gotten so used to that. I don't want to go back to the office. I don't want to go back to the hustle and bustle. I really have enjoyed this time to be able to invest in relationships at home. But at the same time, I would tell you that I've become empathetic, a lot of empathy for those that are having a tough time. I've been able to, through Zoom, there are people that I've had personal contact with so many times that we regularly schedule lunch times and being able to do things together and do projects together and to have meetings together, whether it's colleagues or whether it's ministry related or whether it's professionally related. That was gone. And we were now doing it through a digital interface. And I could see it in their lives as they were sharing the difficult, the loneliness, the tolls that it's taken on them because they fed so much off of that. I'm just very blessed, very lucky that my children are still at home. And the kind of work that I do lent itself to where I could adjust very quickly. I mean, even my teaching, most of it is done online. So it was a very easy transition for me. But I had to put myself in other people's shoes and be able to be to have empathy for those that are having tough time during this time. So that was the thing. I don't want to come across as, this was great. But I can be transparent and tell you that there's a lot of positive that came out of this, at least for me personally.
Yeah, I think that's the story, right? Folks like you and I who have been able to maybe adapt a little bit easier, but you realize how many folks out there have not had that same luck. Your children, are they school age? Are they?
They are. I have a daughter that's 17 and I have a son that's 16.
Oh, wow. So they're missing. What has that been like for you and for them?
And I think that's what's been very interesting because they've been homeschooled. And so they didn't miss a beat. Just the interaction that they've had with friends, that was limited, very limited. The relationships at church, obviously, those were extremely limited, and they cope with it. But again, because of their daily routine was always at home, and they were part of dual enrollment that we have here in Georgia. And so all that kind of work has been done online. And so as far as education and as far as what they were doing, their daily routine wasn't disrupted much. So it was a fairly easy adjustment. I have to admit it, we were just very lucky. Very much.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your church, let's say before I forget, so what happened there? Did y'all suspend the church that you attend? Did they suspend?
It was suspended, and then they eventually went to live stream, and then eventually at the late part of last year started meeting again, because Georgia has had compared to the rest of the nation has had lax approach to the virus, and so it's stayed fairly open. It's just that you have to follow social distancing protocols and masking protocols. So it's different in that sense. The times that we were able to go to church or actually gather, you're just sitting with the four of us, socially distanced from everybody else, and participating of your regular church service with a mask on. So that makes it different. But yeah, I think that for the most part of last year, that's probably, if there was an area that took a toll, it was that one. Our spiritual life suffered in that sense that we were not engaged in our church and in our faith and our spiritual development for quite a few months.
How long more or less?
From March through December.
Oh, wow.
I think we just started going back here in January. So yeah, you're talking about a good solid 9 months of
Yeah.
not interacting at all, except email, text,
Mhm.
yeah, that definitely took a toll, and we just had to we were forced in a sense make up for it here at home,
Mhm.
in leading my family a little bit more in me taking the responsibility as far as the spiritual side was concerned. Whether it's through conversations, whether it was through devotionals, or whether it was just being able to keep our faith alive as we were going through this. So it kind of like set us back to how the first stages of faith and how church was conducted before the large organized religion or congregational was more at home and family led. And that's kind of how we survived during those months.
Well, it seems like you're probably the best, perfect fit for it. Good thing that you were in that.
It's the crazy thing, they my son, I think, expressed it to me in one of the months. He was just like, we were talking about that, things we were missing and things like that. He's like, Dad, I basically got my dad, my pastor, and my teacher at home. You fill all three. And so, and kind of, was working out that way. So you see a greater plan behind it. That even in the midst of all this, you're able to say, what, God does have control of all this, and nothing in my life didn't contribute even to this moment. And I'm sure there's a lot more life to live because I'm still here. And certainly there's a lot more things that we're going to face as a nation, as a people, and as a world. But to be able to say, even through this crisis, through this pandemic, much of what has happened in my life, what I've experienced in my life, what I've been equipped with, was made useful at this moment in time in the life of at least 3 people in my household. It's really neat to be able to see that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what I wanted to ask is related to that. There's been, I work at the Protestant seminary here at UT, so I'm somewhat exposed to, religious life, religious institution. And there's been a lot of talk about the theology of the pandemic, right? And just how to grapple with big events like these where there's so much suffering, there's so much death. And I wonder, have you had those conversations either with your children or with, folks from church through email, or when you're coming back, have people at your church, the pastor at the church you attend, talked about that? I mean, how do you conceive, or how do you talk about something so unique, right? A once in a century event like this from a faith perspective?
Certainly. Yeah, that's where your faith, I always say it's these moments where your faith, the rubber meets the road. It's easy to talk about doctrine. It's easy to talk about things that you believe and creeds and faith statements. But when life crisis hit, that's when your faith is tested. That's when you show what you're really made of. Was this all just, fun stuff that you talk about, or do you really live this? This is really part of you. And I think that this is just one aspect of it. I think about, what people of faith, what they thought of when they were walking through the bubonic plague, or when they were facing, what were Christians or people of faith, when they were facing great periods of drought or great periods of social unrest. What did faith-based people do during the Reign of Terror, the French Revolution? What did people do during the Civil War here in the United States? What was the world like when during World War II and major crises like that? And even before that, you had the Spanish flu. And so these moments of testing for a generation is what lets reality be exposed. We're a nation, we're a culture that is so saturated with myth and things that are unreal. Whether it's submerging in video games or submerging in Hollywood or submerging in your own personal fantasies through internet and social media. I mean, in social media, you can be somebody you're not. And so we live in a culture that permits us to live a fake life, to live an ideal life, even if you want to put a positive spin on it. And then these crises, what they do is they kind of like throw you back into reality. And I think a lot of people, what they had to grapple with was they had to look around and say, okay, this is really my life. And I don't like it. You know, up until this point, I've been living manufactured, and it's been going okay, you know, in whatever direction they were going. But notice that this pandemic shut everything down, shut sports down, shut Hollywood down. You know, I think even music studios have been limited. And then it's forced everybody into social media, and they've been engaging in that way. And I think what happens is that here is where you realize, do I believe that I have been created for a greater purpose than just living, you know, day by day, you know, living out 24 hours each day or living a fantasy. This is my reality. This is where I am, and this is who I am. And now I have to live this out. And I think this was a lot of what the pandemic has done to people. And many people have looked into the mirror and don't like what they see. And that's made it a crisis. We've seen suicides go up during this period. And many say, well, it's, you know, it's the mental health, it's the isolation. And I would venture to say, you know, from a spiritual perspective, I think it's just people looking in the mirror and not liking what they see and being discouraged by it. And so I think that's where people look up. I've been touched by this. I mean, I've seen, you know, my interaction with my students that I was teaching last year that now COVID has taken their lives. Colleagues that also COVID has taken them. And you sit there and you do grapple with the question, and you say, you know, through a faith perspective, you know, this is all in God's plans. And just like World War II was, just like the Spanish flu was, just like Vietnam was, just like the bubonic plague was, just like so many things were. And be able to say, you know, what we do as Christians, what we do as people of faith, whether it is Christian, and I believe that's, you know, that's what I've preached all my life, and I believe that's where the truth is in what Protestants show. But whether it's Muslim or whether it's Jewish, these are the moments where you press into God more. This is the moments where you explore more. Okay, all these things I've been saying, you know, are they truth in my life? Do I really believe that there is a God who is creator of all? Yes, I do. Do I believe that there is a God that loves us? Absolutely. So then I have to interpret that through the midst of a pandemic that's taking people's lives and is disrupting society as we know it, and be able to sit here and say, this is part of it all. This is part of our development all. And so the thing is not to sit and wring your hands and wonder, oh my goodness, you know, how awful this is. But to, as I've told my conversations I've had with my children, I said, these are moments where you embrace this, because you don't know if tomorrow you become a victim of COVID. What kind of life have you lived out to this point? Are we living out the hope that we preach? Are we living out the hope that we tell others about? That hope has to be alive in us, whether through life or death. And I think, and I don't know if I've answered the question completely, but I think that in a sense, that's what these moments bring us to, is to, it tests the waters, and I've seen in lives of others that were so beholden to things, whether it was politics or a certain type of creed. This pandemic has disrupted all that, and they've lost hope. And for them to be able to see that, even in the midst of this, my faith hasn't been affected. It's actually become stronger. It sends a message to where it maybe can be a help to others, that we need to embrace the truth of the gospel, being able to embrace the truth of faith, that God is real, that God is working in human history, and we're proof of it, in a sense. We didn't survive this because we pulled ourselves up from our bootstraps. We survived this because everything that we have invested in our lives and preached and believed is now being put into practice. And I think, as I think you said it in the question, how I've seen it in others, and I've seen in others how this is so contrary to Protestant Christianity in particular, and I think to Catholic Christianity also, in that you can't use this as an excuse to hunker down and disappear. Or contrary, you got to go and serve now, and serve even more. The world is even needier than when we left it. And so I think that in the midst of crises and in the midst of difficulty, true faith is strengthened. And that's how I've been able to interpret these months.
We'll have to have you come guest preach at my church one day.
That's it.
And I want to make sure that we get to talking about sort of the professional aspect, or the professional with regards to politics and LIBRE aspect of what you do. And so you said you began working in 2019 with LIBRE, so not too long before all this started happening.
Correct.
I know from speaking with Danielle that some of what y'all do is explicitly political, some of it is more education, engaging communities, helping, advocating for communities. So can you talk about what your work was like pre-pandemic? I mean, the nuts and bolts, what are you doing on the ground? What are you involved in? And then how does the pandemic begin to change that?
Well, yeah. When you work for a grassroots organization, its lifeblood is community involvement. When I first came on in December of 19, it's about the time that Corona was discovered. So it comes apart with that. But my work at the very beginning was just laying the groundwork for a very robust involvement in the community. Community events. It was going to be a political year, so we were going to be involved politically in one way or another, supporting a candidate through our action organization. And my life before the pandemic was just, I was traveling immensely. I already love to travel, but to have a job where your organization is scattered through 36 states, LIBRE in particular is 13 of those, but we have our sister organization, AFP, and being able to be in Washington D.C. for meetings, and being able to fly out to Nevada and be able to meet my colleagues there. And then we were down in Houston, and we were there, and I went to Orlando, and pretty much from December 9th when I started till about the end of February, I had been to all these places. I had met all these people, started forging relationships, and big plans for how we were going to engage the Hispanic community in Georgia, and the kind of things we want to do, events we were going to do, conferences so that we were going to be part of, coalitions that we were going to build. And in 24 hours, that was over. In 24 hours, we got a notice from our headquarters. Every office is shut down. And they're still shut down to the 31st of March of this year. And so everything, the entire apparatus they say travel is restricted to essential only. So it was done. And no offices. The offices were off limits, even at the state level. No events. Let's transition over to digital. And we had to start thinking that way now, was the digital aspect of it. For me, it was difficult because the Hispanic community is just not inclined to engaging at the digital community. They need the hand pressing and the hugs and the human communication and the being able to spend time together. So to try to get them to engage digitally the way that they are used to physically, that was a tall order. And so for my role at LIBRE, the change was drastic. I wasn't a fish out of water because, like I said, a lot of my life, I've been able to engage, never at a level like this. But I remember things shutting down after 9/11. You know, those couple of days when we were in a national emergency, and I was teaching school at that time. And like I said, you know, not just the crisis side of it, but then also the fact that I've taught online and that I've been able to engage digitally to make that transition quickly was easy. But as far as what I was projecting, the kind of work I was going to be doing, the kind of plans I had, it all had to be scrapped. And I remember talking to my state director at the time. It was about mid-March, and I said, we got to start all over. And he said, yeah. He said, yeah, pretty much. And
So, go ahead. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, that, yeah.
Well, I mean, so what you're talking about switching, so y'all are doing community engagement, you have to switch to digital, you're very limited, but Hispanic communities, to speak broadly, maybe you're not as inclined or don't have the capabilities in some cases to engage, as easily digitally. So where do you think, having now been able to look back on the whole cycle, where did you find success? Where would you say, okay, this was something that we think we did well and that we would continue to do, even when things maybe get back to normal?
Yeah, I think that certainly the digital has forced the Latino community to embrace it. They realize this thing is not going away. At least, during 2020, they were just like, it was always on the phone, when are we going to get back? When are things going to start happening again? And you're saying, not for a long time. And so that when they started, I think when the community started seeing their students go to digital, they kind of started embracing it. You saw more activity in social media. You saw more activity in Zoom meetings and things like this. And we kind of had to change the mindset and say, okay, well, you can't fill up a room, but you can fill up a screen. And we do have technology like Zoom. You got technology such as Microsoft Teams, things that people can at least find some engagement. And we started building a activity around that. Now, 2020 is interesting because a lot of it we were caught in the election cycle. And so a lot of my time pretty much transitioned over to helping AFP and the reelection of Senator David Perdue. And so I found myself just engaging in that side. We would do texting campaigns, we would do digital campaigns. But as far as community building with LIBRE, it kind of, to a certain extent, it got put to the back burner because of the pandemic, but also because of the priority we were giving to the reelection of a candidate. But in the midst of that, we started doing things we've never done before, like holding Facebook Live streaming events. One of the first things I did was a very gracious doctor at the very beginning when everybody was going crazy and wanting answers, sat with me, a Hispanic doctor, and sat with me so that we could answer questions about coronavirus. And so we live streamed that, and it got, it got a good response. People were just like, responding, thinking, okay, thank you for giving us the information. Even though it was all available, people were on the internet and things. They were doing that. We were seeing more and more of the Hispanic community trying to get connected, because if they weren't connected digitally, they weren't going to be connected at all. They weren't allowed to travel. They weren't allowed to do things. So it kind of, the pandemic kind of forced the Latino community to have to get that laptop, had to find a way to get connected, either through their smartphone or some way to be connected to the world. And so we wanted to be able to provide the resources we always provide through a digital landscape. I don't think that's going away. I really don't. I think that even when things get, I don't like saying get back to normal, because things are never going to get back to normal. We're going to have a new normal. So when things open up and things start changing again, I don't see the digital investment being something that we can say, okay, we're done. Let's go back to what we were doing before. I think it's part of our lives now. It's part of our existence. It's part of the innovation. I think that organizations such as LIBRE are going to survive if they have a very strong and robust digital presence, even after this. I think what experts say that, if you do something 21 days, it becomes a habit. Well, we've been doing this for 9 months. People are used to this. People are used to opening their laptop and engaging the world. I think it's going to be difficult. Again, I'm not a prophet, but I think it's going to be difficult to start getting back into spaces again, to start telling people, hey, come to our event. There's going to be more caution. There's going to be more disruption of daily routine now. It's just like, I work at home. I do everything. Can you guys do it through Facebook? Are you going to live stream it? Every time, it was very interesting. We're trying to organize one of our first meetings here, one of our first events. And the number one question I get is, are you going to live stream it? So I think that's what's changing grassroots in many ways. And I think it's due to the pandemic.
You mean you're organizing one of your first back in-person events, and people are asking? I see. Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, that's so related to that. The counterweight to this question is, what do you, looking ahead to, let's say 2022, you'll have what will likely be a very high-profile national attention governor's race there. What are you eager? What do you, if you've got some new tools that you all have adapted and picked up, but what could you not do, some of the specific practices and practices or things that y'all are doing to engage again with Hispanic communities, and particularly in mind, that you are, in 2022, we got to get back to that, because that's essential. We need to be able to do that.
Yeah, I don't think that the door-to-door campaigning goes away. I think that engaging people on the ground can never be something that is eliminated. You got to get back to that. You got to get back to engaging the voter in at a personal level. I just don't think that goes away, because the transition to digital and the transition to other modes of communication, everybody's going to be doing it. Everybody's going to get involved there. If people were annoyed about the phone calls and the texting and the direct mail in this last election cycle, get ready. You're going to have a lot more of that in 22, especially if people are still hunkered down at home for whatever reason, or just simply things have opened up, but they just got into a routine where they're doing more at home and more digitally. Digital ads and ways of communicating in that direction are going to be part of it. And what that does is just saturates. It's information overload. If now you're competing for your message to be heard, your message to be said. I don't see any other way to to overcome that than to go to the person's door. And I think that, to your question, as we approach 22 and we have, very important elections for both sides, it doesn't, you can't walk away from that aspect of voter contact. Any grassroots organization has to understand that the public rallies are going to become less and less effective because everybody's moved to digital, but then the digital is going to be less and less effective because people are saturated. So we've got to go back to and continue doing and perfecting the door-to-door campaign and the personal voter contact campaign. So that's number one. I see that cannot change. That actually has to be ramped up.
So I, speak to different people, different aspects of politics, all Latino, Hispanic for this project. I'm sure it won't surprise you that as a Republican, you are in the minority of, folks that we generally speak with, just not because we have any partisan outlook, but just because that's, the nature of the community in many ways. And you've spoken quite a bit to this already, but if you could just be explicit about what is it about the Republican Party, about Republican ideals, conservative ideals, that drives you and has driven you for so long to be a part of politics? And how do you transmit that message, or what parts of that message have you found to be successful in competing for Latino votes in Georgia? In what, I would imagine is an uphill battle, right? I mean, it's lopsided Democrat. So what motivates you? And then what have you found to be successful in engaging with these communities? What issues do they care about?
Sure. What motivates me is probably no surprise to some that, that understand, oh my goodness, he's Cuban. So we know why. I always grew up with, I had an uncle that would say, David, do you know why us Cubans are Republicans? And I'll say, why? He says, 2 reasons, Kennedy and Castro. And it would always make me laugh, and it's just too simplistic. What motivates me about the Republican Party as we are today, I mean, it could change tomorrow. It certainly has changed over the years. It's certainly not the Republican Party that it was 20 years ago, for example. But what motivates me are 3 things. The continual defense of life. Whether hypocritical or not, it's still a party of freedom and freedom-mindedness. And the third aspect of it is that it is a party of wanting to, whether again hypocritical or not, a party of economic prosperity, a party of not to depend on government. And so that's what motivates me when I look at the Republican Party. And even being part now of a nonpartisan organization. I mean, I've been all my life a Republican, and it's never bothered me to be in the minority. It's actually given me opportunities to have conversations that I otherwise wouldn't have. But I try to always communicate those 3 things. And if the other party would embrace it, I'm with them. And there are certain things where the other party has embraced it. And I'm able to say, you know what, to a certain extent, they got it right when it comes to immigration, for example. Here we are, a party of freedom, a party of faith, a party of life, a party of economic prosperity, but we're, we just will not budge on immigration. To me, that's hypocritical. To me, that doesn't make sense. So those are the things that motivate me. I'm always on the side of life. And of course, when we're talking about life, we're talking about abortion primarily, but not just that. I'm talking about just overall the culture of death something that I oppose in any aspect of it.
What do you mean by that?
Whether it's glorifying it in our media, whether it's always defaulting to the death penalty, for example, which I think we've made a lot of inroads with criminal justice reform, and being able to not see capital punishment as the only resort to thwart criminal activity, but always looking to life, always looking to the hope that someone can change, someone can be reformed, that a child should have the opportunity to live, no matter how they were brought into this world. They need the opportunity to live. And so that culture of life is something that just motivates me in every aspect, because of course it's fueled by my faith in the fact that I see every human being as created in the image of God. And so that brings with it dignity, brings in it the ability to say that just because someone is mentally ill doesn't mean that they're less of a citizen than Jeff Bezos. And so they should be afforded opportunities to their capacity. They should be afforded opportunities and should be protected for that reason. And so the life motivates me, the freedom, and again, the economic prosperity. What I do then to be able to communicate that is to, I'm a realist, and I try to get particularly Hispanics to understand that when it comes to the aspect of life, the vast majority agree. Hispanics are family oriented. They love their families. They love life. When you talk these issues, they're like, oh, I'm with you on that. They always tell me, well, I don't agree with my party on that. And I'm like, okay, all right, and they say, well, there's stuff that you don't agree with the Republicans. And I say, yeah, that's true. But life is a big deal. And so we I tried to get them to understand, we've got a lot of common ground here. When you have a political party that one way or another in their platform still is defending life and will always defend, well, at least for now, they defend life. I said, but here's the thing. Here's the realism, is that a human being will always trade safety for freedom. And the dilemma that the citizen faces today, particularly Hispanic, because we're talking about the Hispanics that are majority Democrat or majority the other side. This is very true. And security in this day and age becomes more important. I want to feel safe. I want to be safe, whether it's safety, whether it's financial safety, whether it's safety from a virus, whether it's safety from crime, whether it's safety from foreign invasion. Whatever aspect of safety there is, how I define safety, maybe job security is safety, maybe having access to healthcare is safety. I'm willing to trade my freedom for that safety. And for the Democrat, as I understand it, the ultimate entity to provide true safety is government. And I think that when I bring the message to them, I say, they always say, well, why are you a Republican? I said, because I don't want to depend on government for everything. I don't believe government has the answer to everything. And remember, I spent 12 years in a public school. I saw what government has done in education. I see what government does to healthcare and the VA system. I see what government has done to perpetuate poverty in whether it's the welfare system or whether it's in the cities or in the communities. The more we trade our freedom for safety, the more we trade individual pursuits for government protection, the more that the cycle of poverty and the cycle of dependency grows. I've never seen anyone, I'm sure there's statistics out there and anecdotally, but data-driven, show me someone that has 100% dependent on government and government has brought them out of poverty. We don't see that data. Now, when government gets into the process of creating opportunities, there's a different ballgame there. But when government is saying, depend on me, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of your health, your education. I'm going to take care of your income. I'm going to take care of your public safety. It never turns out right. The neighborhoods continue to be poor. The neighborhoods continue to be backwards economically. The neighborhoods continue to be unsafe. And so as the way that's ingrown in my DNA is that freedom and the opportunity to break down barriers to achieve the American dream through freedom. The less dependency on government that I have, the more I've been able to see it. I've seen progress. My father, no matter how poor we were, and I remember those days as an immigrant family, and just the times where we're just eating a bowl of rice because that's all mom could get at the grocery store, because that's all dad could provide that week. And sitting around the table and just having that, and my dad saying, number one, we depend on God. Today, we're going to be thankful for this bowl of rice and pray that he will provide more. He goes, number one, we're going to be grateful to God. And number two, we will never ask the government for help. And he says, I will not stick my hand out for government help. And he said, I'm going to work for it. Even if I have to work for it every hour of the day, I'm going to provide for my family. And that kind of upbringing just created in my DNA the reality that you can do this. The son of an immigrant who did not know the English language, who failed first grade, who grew up in an immigrant poor neighborhood, was elected state representative of the state of Georgia, and now has a PhD from a great institution. It wasn't because I'm anybody. It's because the freedoms that were afforded to me, we took advantage of. And we didn't accept the narrative that government is the only way out, or that government is the only safety net. We ventured out, we pioneered, we went out and looked for opportunities and developed. And was it hard? Of course it was. But my father, if he was still with us, would be able to say, my son did better than I did. And now my children are going to do better than I did. And that's what the American dream is all about. And so that's the message I carry to the community, that you really have to come to grips. What do you want? Do you want security or do you want freedom? Because freedom, yes, brings a lot of risk. It does. But I would argue to say that your security and your dependency on government also brings risk. And it's a risk of keeping you where you're at. And I just don't see the solution there. So that's the message I carry.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are some tensions that I hear there. You speak about government creating opportunity, but not dependency. And so I want to ask you about the politics of the pandemic here, especially related to Hispanic communities, right? Because we've seen that here in Texas, especially across the country. I imagine in Georgia, I don't know exactly the numbers in Georgia, that Hispanic communities have been disproportionately. We die at higher rates. We are infected at higher rates. We are hospitalized at higher rates. And there are more folks working on the front lines, more folks who can't stay at home. There's a lot of different reasons that may or may not be behind that. But so when you see something like that, for example, or you see this community, the community of which you form part, this Hispanic community, suffering disproportionately, what role, if any, do you think does the government have, or what would be the Republican, how does from a Republican campaign or Republican policy standpoint, look at the reality of the ground and say, here's the way forward so that, next time this isn't like this. Next time y'all aren't dying in higher numbers than, your population. What do you think?
Definitely. I think that, there's two ways that you're supposed to go about this. One is when there's a crisis, and one when there isn't a crisis, and setting the building blocks for that. I always gave the example, one of my points of disagreement has been with my own party. And really, I don't like saying, because again, with LIBRE, I'm nonpartisan. So let's say with conservatives, to oppose a stimulus, to oppose spending. And I'm sitting here going, I just don't understand that. Because when someone, I give this analogy, when someone's bleeding, you don't sit there and lecture them on what they could have done not to get cut. That's a conversation for later. Right now, you got to get them to the hospital. Right now, you got to take care of, you got to stop the bleeding, and you got to get them to a point where they're stabilized. Then later we can talk about, okay, what dangerous thing were you doing that caused the cut, and let's stop that, right? So there are two different conversations. I think that when you are in a crisis like we are in the pandemic, I think government, in many ways, just like other entities, needs to step in, needs to be able to help. There is a frontline effort, whether it's through economic stimulus, whether it's through different services that are provided to the community in order to get them on their feet. And it's really not to get them on their feet, it's to help them survive the crisis that they're in the midst of. There's got to be a leeway there, and it's interesting because that's one of the criticisms that I have of my conservative mind and the party, is that it's still a everybody to themselves kind of thing. It's terrible for you. I'm sorry you're going through that, but government's not the answer. And you got to say, stop that. Okay, we're in a crisis. This is just like if we were in the middle of a war. You've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to take care of the emergency right now, and that takes resources. That may even take government to do things that you don't agree with, like a $2 trillion spending bill. I know that I know conservatives that cringe to that. We can't afford that. I said, I know we can't afford that, but we haven't been able to afford anything we've been doing. And right now we got a crisis. So we've got to do things in order to deal with that immediately. But then you've got the second part of the conversation and like you said, okay, what do we do now so that this never happens again to the Hispanic community, to where the Hispanic community is able to, as they say in Spanish, hacerle frente, that they can face a crisis like this. And there are things that government can create the opportunities for. For example, school choice. Even before a pandemic, Hispanics were disproportionately being educated in subpar school districts. The wealthier Americans can send their kids wherever they want. But whether you're African American, and of course we're talking about the Hispanic right now, Hispanic community, you're not afforded those opportunities. You're stuck in attendance zones. And I'm a firm believer, because I see it in my life, that education is a major component of social mobility. Education is a major component in being able to progress out of the work that you're doing now and achieving skills, whatever the skills are. And I'm not talking about getting a law degree or a liberal arts degree. I'm talking about learning computer science. I'm talking about becoming a plumber. I'm talking about, learning engineering and being able to invest in a community that where they have the opportunity to acquire the best education that will allow them to be able to progress out of their current situation. And so I'm a firm believer that government can create opportunities if they just get out of the way of education and be able to open it up through school choice. I believe that that healthcare, same thing. I always fall on the side of freedom. And the reason why healthcare is so beyond, and you know, and I know people will argue with me, and there's different positions on this, and that's fine. But from what I've learned in my time in the legislature is that the prices are driven up because the consumer is left out of the process. The patient is left out of the process. This is negotiated between insurance companies and doctors. And if we were able to, for government to step in and open opportunities to where, just like I shop for a car insurance that is comparable to my income level. Yes, I know that probably the coverage that Bill Gates has on his Mercedes is not going to be even close to the coverage I can afford to cover my Kia, right? But I have a choice as to what that coverage could be. And with the kind of car that I can afford, with the kind of insurance I can have, the marketplace needs to be opened up to where Hispanics don't have to say, I have to look to government to be able to get healthcare, but to be able to say there is a market out there of products that I can acquire at my income level to take care of myself and take care of my family. And so again, you're relying on the opportunities that government can create. Those are the things that have to be taken care of, that where we put the Hispanic community in a position to where when the next crisis comes, they have resources that they have created for themselves, and not in a situation where if it's another pandemic, it takes the toll that it's taken. And you know, I don't think we haven't delved into the data as to why. Why is it that Hispanics are dying at a greater rate? Why is it that the pandemic has taken such a toll on the community in many ways? I think an aspect of that is going to be generally because many Hispanics find themselves in poorer communities, poorer neighborhoods with less resources available to them, and with lack of ability for them to acquire resources because, you know, they do a certain job that they can't do right now because it's been closed down. So they're out, they don't have the income. And so those things can be progressed through education reform, through healthcare reform, but then of course that third component is immigration reform. Many Hispanics are suffering because they may be in a situation where they don't have the status to be able to acquire the job they need or acquire the resources they need because they're non-citizens or they are undocumented or they're illegally here. And so that aspect of it has to be done. And these are examples of where government steps in and creates opportunities. They're not dictating. They're not, you know, writing out programs, you know, implementing programs. But what they're doing is essentially creating a framework to where the Hispanic can progress. And I'm very proud of our community because I think you put the right tools in the hands of a Hispanic and they will progress. Look what the Cuban did to Miami and what they've done there. And it's because government gave them the tools. And why can't we make those same opportunities available to all Hispanics, all different backgrounds of Hispanics? And so that's how I see it as far as government is concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to talk about the politics of this election and the Republican Party, conservatism, you know, seen through the eyes of the Republican Party. As someone, an activist, a conservative activist in Georgia, what are some of the major factors that explain to you why first the state flipped in November for the presidency, why Biden was able to win the state from Trump, and then why, you know, 2 months later, a Senator Perdue who almost won his election ends up losing? I mean, what happened there to your point of view?
I would say, particularly with Georgia, there's quite a few factors. Everyone wants to identify that silver bullet. And I say it's not a silver bullet. It was the lining up of planets. We had layer after layer after layer of situations that basically just came to a head at one moment and gave us this. One serious major aspect of what's happening in Georgia is a film tax credit, where we have basically paid, and data is showing that it's not benefiting the state to give these tax breaks to Hollywood. And those that work on films find their way to Georgia, and they realize this is a great place to live, and this is a great standard of living, and I'm getting paid my California salary, but I'm working on these projects here, and they settle in the state, but they bring their voting record with them. The film tax credit was implemented in 2008. So we're talking about, it's been 12, almost 13 years in existence. And within that time period, Georgia has seen 700,000 people move into the state. That's going to affect an election. It's just the reality of it. So that's one aspect of it, is that there's a lot of domestic immigration into Georgia. Georgia has become a place to settle, and it's attracting folks that are coming from states that have been more left-leaning, and that's one aspect. Secondly, the Democratic Party has organized. Being since 2004, really since 2002. When I was elected in 2002, we flipped the governorship and the state senate. I served 2 years in the minority, and then in 2004, we flipped the state house. So really, for the last 20 years, Georgia Democrats have been fighting, and losing elections and being in the minority. And when you're in the minority that long, you start figuring out what you need to do to win. While the party in power is just trying to figure out how to keep the boat afloat, right? So you're distracted. The party in power is distracted about keeping government running, while the minority is figuring out how to win. And I think that they formed a very good strategy in place for what they needed to do to start winning elections, whether through organizing voter registrations, whether it's been organizing whatever they needed to do to align different coalitions. They've been working on that. It's not something that happened overnight. This is something that organizations, particularly the one that's being led by Stacey Abrams, something they got started doing back in 2014. So, I think Republicans woke up November 5th and just sat around and said, what happened to our state? It changed overnight. And my argument is, no, it didn't happen overnight. We need to realize this has been going on for quite a long time. It's just that it happened to now align. So they've been working hard to get people registered. They've been working hard to build their coalitions. That's number two. Number three is that, and this is just Newton's second law of thermodynamics, is that the Republican Party, in many ways, is just lax in its ideas. It's been, for the last 2 to 4 years, not doing any big ticket items, not doing things that our citizens are calling for, but just trying to keep business as usual, and just passing a state budget, one after another. And so you have a metro area that's just discontent with the attention that the rural areas have gotten over the last years. discontent with a Republican Party that all it talks about is tax reform, but never does it. Health reform, but never does it. School choice reform, but never does it. And so after a while, you keep re-electing and re-electing and re-electing with the promises that these reasons why we elected you. And I believe that the state wants conservative policies because we have majorities right now. But the party just won't do it and just will not take on the major issues that define conservatism. And you just become complacent, you become apathetic. And so many times the desire for change becomes a desire for any change. And so you've got that third aspect now of a complacent party in power and on fire opposition, and the fact that population is moving in that is sympathetic to the message of the left. It's no surprise what happened in 2018. It's no surprise what happened in 2020. The fourth factor is it's our national politics. Obviously, Trump had a lot to do with this. And it's not Trump's policies, because Georgia voted for Trump the first go around. Among Latinos, Trump's numbers went up 10%. So 27% of Latinos voted for Trump in 16 here in Georgia. 37% voted for Trump this go around. So it's the policies and the things he wants to do. It's definitely something that resonates with Latinos, resonates with African Americans, resonates with conservatives. But there was a character flaw, and we can't deny it, that there's a character flaw, and his character flaw is not very Georgian. And so you have this factor of this personality that's bigger than life, that's an anomaly, and you couple it with the other three things I just talked about, and you've got an interesting recipe. The final planet that lined up was coronavirus. And all the exit polling is showing that the reason why Perdue and Loeffler lost in the second go around in the runoff is because the Senate couldn't get it together and give the stimulus. So at the top of the list, 78% of Georgians said they were in favor of the $2,000 stimulus check. So when Mitch McConnell said no, they took it out on Perdue and Loeffler. And so everybody say, "Oh, so you're blaming the stimulus on that?" I'd say, no, it's one aspect. So when you have that, when you have all these things working in tandem, you have what you have. You have the results. And I think that those five things working together, coming together, pretty much flipped Georgia.
Yeah, complex situation, right? Very, very complex. And by the way, I know we're at 1:30. If you have to go at all, let me know, please. But I do have a couple more questions. I'll ask them as long as you have the time. So you mentioned Latino support goes up for Trump across the board in Georgia and generally across the board this election over the past 4 years. And again, I know a lot of complexities there. So I wonder, and you have mentioned that there are issues that you personally think the Republican Party needs to adapt, issues like immigration, an issue that it's not the only issue important to Hispanic communities, but it is generally very important to certain elements of Hispanic communities, certainly. And I wonder, with Trump, there seems to be an element, folks like Stephen Miller, Chris Kobach, elements that are hard against immigration, illegal immigration is the framework that is used, but in ways that often come against, or to some communities come as anti-Hispanic, right, anti-Latino. Looking to the future, what are you hoping to see in 2024? Are you looking for Do you think if Trump decides to run again, that's going to be the best option for y'all? If a spiritual successor to Trump runs again, is that going to be the, what is best for the direction of your party and for garnering support for Hispanics? Or are you looking for, maybe like a Romney or something else? Like, what are you hoping happens over the next couple of years with your party? What do you think is going to be best for growth?
Yeah, I would say Trump has done something that no Republican candidate has ever done, and that is activate the number of voters that he did. He is the highest vote getter, and many would say, well, that's just simply because of turnout. Well, people have to be motivated to turn out, and if you say that Trump is responsible for turnout, then that turnout should have been negative, which was, because Biden is the highest vote getter of any Democrat, right? But nevertheless, it wasn't that he wasn't alone in getting more Democrat votes. Trump garnered more Republican votes. So he was able to attract a segment of our society that felt alienated, that felt forgotten. And I think that cannot be ignored. He had a message that resonated with segments of our society that, for one reason or another, may feel now that we're going to go back to the Stone Age. We're going to go back to the Dark Ages. We're gonna back off. And he was our hero. He's been defeated, and nobody's going to be able to be like him anymore. And they're going to go back to where they were, silent, non-voting, in a sense, which I'm hoping that doesn't happen. So the Republican Party has a lot of introspection to do. Conservatives have a lot of introspection to do. We need to figure out, and I don't think there's much to figure out. I think we need to come to grips with that the message of Donald Trump resonated and even awoke, moved the needle of African American, Hispanic, and Asian votes, and particularly Hispanics. That's the one that surprised everybody. What is it about this administration, this guy that makes Hispanics want to vote Republican? And he's the one that always said build the wall and all these kind of things. What is it with that? So I think when you're looking at 2024, you're looking at someone that has to have that same populist message, someone that has to say, America first. Here's my thing. And this is up to debate. I've even had debates with fellow Hispanics about this, fellow conservative Hispanics about this, because I keep taking them to the point and I say, tell me why the needle moved. And the reason I suggest, the reason is that, like, being a Hispanic myself, we came to this country, we abandoned our country of origin to find a better life here. And here you have a candidate, here you have a president whose message is, you didn't make the wrong choice. You picked the best country. You really did make the right choice in coming here. And when you're hearing someone defend America, you're hearing someone say, this place that now is your home, I want to make it better. I think overshadowed or at least minimized the immigration concerns. Because there's a reason why I'm here. I want economic prosperity. I want a better life for my family, for my children. I want a safer community to grow up in. I left my country of origin because here's where the opportunities are. And here's someone defending that. And I think that resonated with Hispanics. The candidate in 24 has to muster that too. Has to be able to say, look, I'm not going to sell this country out to another nation. I'm not going to sell this country out to ideas. You came here, and the opportunities that you see others have achieved, I know you want to achieve them too. And I want to be the person to make that opportunity available to you. And that's going to drive them there. I think what happens many times with Republicans, and here's where they mess up on their messaging. I know they do. They're not communicating right. But I would say that also the Hispanic community that bridge hasn't been built so that the Republicans can understand the Hispanic community. When I have conversations with my conservative friends, I tell them, I would assure you that Hispanic community, for the vast majority, don't want illegal immigration either. What they want is immigration reform. They see that the system is broken. They see that to try to do this the right way, you got to wait 10 years to get a visa? Come on. So we want immigration reform. And I think that Republicans need to be able to communicate and say, hey, we're with you. We're not anti-immigrant. We just want a system that works, and we want to thwart illegal immigration. Well, the only way that's going to happen is when Republicans, when the conservatives actually take a charge and they actually own immigration reform. They need to start offering solutions. I think Daniel Garza had it right. He said, if the Congress, particularly talking to conservatives, if you can't get DACA right, you're not going to fix anything else. This is a no-brainer. And so I think it's come to the point where for any Republican in the future needs to understand that you need to defend this country. You need to this country's great already. You're talking, that message of this is the country of your home, of your heritage, of your new home and your new opportunities. And I'm going to defend that. But I'm empathetic to the barriers that you're facing. And I'm going to work hard to fix the system and to make sure that we have open arms to whoever wants to come here to build their life. And we're going to provide a process that is going to allow you to come here legally and be able to have hope that you will get in order to provide for your family. If we can get a candidate that can articulate that, I think it's a winning recipe. I'm not sure if we're there. I'm not sure if it's gonna be there because in the reality is, I had this conversation. This is anecdotal, but I had this conversation with a liberal friend a week ago, and he was arguing about, just to me about how the previous administration, what they did to Hispanics and what they've done, and they've never fixed immigration. And I had to remind him that Obama and Biden, when they were first elected, they had vast majorities in both houses, and they never got anything done. So there's an element in both the Democratic and the Republican Party that do not want to see immigration reformed. And when that segment of the Republicans speak, they're labeled racist. And when the Democrat section is made known and they keep things from happening, they're called do-nothings. And I think those segments are real. They're there. It's the reality. Yes, there's segments of the conservative side that probably don't want to have any more immigrants come into the country. And the message to them is, you got to be kidding me. That mentality is not going to fly anymore, friend. And Republicans need to have courage to be able to do that. I'm impressed because we have a bill that was introduced here in the state legislature just yesterday to provide in-state tuition for DACA students, sponsored by a Republican legislator and co-sponsored by other Republican legislators. And the reaction was, oh my goodness, those guys are now going to get primaried. And my response was, why? They're trying to bring solutions. And we are the party, if you want to say that can bring this kind of solution. We're trying to provide an opportunity. We are the party that says that education and opportunities is what's going to give you social mobility. And you're trying to stop students that were brought here not by any will of their own. You're going to create barriers for them to be able to go to college, to be able to afford a college education in order to be able to build their lives here. I mean, it contradicts our message of freedom. It contradicts our message of social mobility and economic prosperity. So I'm just hopeful and excited the fact that Republicans are leading the way with issues like that, and we just need more of that. And for my party, that's what needs to be there in 24. I'm afraid that if we go the Mitt Romney route, it's not going to be very successful. Mitt Romney had the worst Latino support. He had worse than Bush, and definitely worse than Trump. So that's not the direction we need to be going, but that's still to be seen.
Yeah, it's interesting. They did that here in Texas. 10 years ago or so, it was not DACA, but undocumented students were given, and that, of course, Republican-controlled legislatures here in Texas. But it was at the time, it was, I guess, more feasible, more within the realm of what is doable.
Yeah.
I only have two more questions for you. One of them's not going to be so fun, but the last one is more optimistic. So the first one is, what are your thoughts on what happened on January 6th? So someone who is, been very involved with politics for a long time, seems to have a very faith-driven, spiritual-driven view of the world. What is it for you to see on January 6th? What I don't, believe is a mischaracterization to say the extreme fringe elements of folks who generally vote Republican, right, of conservative voters, do what they did at the Capitol. What's going through your mind when I assume you're watching it that day? What are you thinking about? When you reflect on what that means for democracy here? What are your thoughts?
I think it's the political climate has reached a level of frustration that starts getting demonstrated that way. I don't ignore on the left what happened during the summer with the riots in cities, the burning of cities, the destruction of property that came from Antifa and BLM. And then all of a sudden you see in January 6th, it's the right that is doing that. And I think it was more appalling because the population, the community as a whole, the nation as a whole would like to think that there is a segment of society that's still reasonable. And so they were able to observe the appalling events of the summer of 2020 and say, well, we're the same ones. And then see your side storming the Capitol. The way I interpret these events is it's just the results of the tension that is building that someone better address and better start looking at it. The rhetoric that's coming out of Congress, for example, in the inauguration, we're told, and I was hopeful. I really, I fought every moment of the day to make sure that Biden didn't get elected president. But here he is now elected president and giving an inauguration speech that was inspiring, and be able to say, not let my partisanship say, I'm not listening to that. Oh, he's, I'm not giving any attention to that. That's not, it was inspiring. But what feeds the tension is here you are talking about the need for unity. And the very first thing that your party does is to try to remove from office someone that's already left office. And so you pause everything in order to hold an impeachment trial. The nation is burning and you're having an impeachment trial, right? And so I think that these kind of things, all they're doing is fueling the tension that's going on. I'm a student of history. And I don't want to say, I don't want to equate January 6th to the storming of the Bastille. during the French Revolution. But it's certainly at the level of the Boston Tea Party. And I got into an argument with many people during that time because someone said, what happened on January 6th is un-American. And I responded, so was the Boston Tea Party un-American? Because there was destruction of property. And we went and we sunk the tea. And it was amazing to watch Americans defend the Boston Tea Party. It was amazing for them to say, you can't equate the two. No, the Boston Tea Party, that was a patriotic event. And I was just asking the question, why? How can you defend the Boston Tea Party? Is it because it's been enshrined in our history books as part of the things that led up to the American Revolution? And not see the tensions and the frustrations with government being seen in an event like January 6th or the events of the summer. And so it's unpleasant to think that, but I just don't think January 6th is an isolated event. I don't think the tensions of the summer are isolated. I think that the citizenry is just getting to the point where they just don't know how to express any longer the frustrations they have with their government. And I don't think the government is realizing that. The government's not listening. I mean, even with the tensions and the things that went on during the summer, I haven't seen this government address the things that fueled the violent protests. And I certainly don't see them addressing the things that fueled January 6th storming of the Capitol. I'm afraid, I want to be hopeful, but I'm afraid we're going to see more of that. Because everybody thought the hope was the ballot box. And when even that has been undermined, in the mind of some, that's been undermined. What do you have left? I think we all know what's left, and we don't want to get there. We don't want to get to that point. But I just think that I don't hold the rights, the events of January 6th as an expression of frustration from the right any more exclusive than the frustrations of the left during the summer. It's my point. I don't condone either one. I don't believe violence is the answer, right? We've got mechanisms to come to agreements, but the Senate tells it all. The nation's split in half. And in order to get a government that is working towards the things that the nation needs, it's been in gridlock for far too long. And I think that the pot is boiling and both sides are finding ways to express that frustration. So I don't think neither January 6th or summer of last year is in a vacuum. These are just aspects. I wouldn't say beginnings, but I would say certainly aspects of a frustration that I don't think has been addressed.
Well, it doesn't sound like there's a lot of room for optimism, but looking to the future, as we as a nation, and there in Georgia, where you are, as we begin to recover from this pandemic, vaccines are rolling out, things will slowly, maybe not return to normal, as you've said, but things will begin to resemble what we understand life was before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. What are you hoping to see happen as far as development? And speaking about your work, political work, engaging Hispanic communities here, recovering from the pandemic, and not just the next 4 years, but the next 10 years. What are you hoping to see? What would 10 years from now you like to look back and say, we did this right, we did this is going well? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd like to see I'd like to see a reviving of faith. a reviving of hearts of people that are turning and realizing that human institutions are not the answer. The answer is me as a person being at peace with God, and as a result, serving my fellow man, or humankind, however we want to say that. I think there is a call to having an idealistic identity again. You know, the founding of the nation, everybody knows as a student of history, things weren't rosy and peachy when we formed this government. There were a lot of problems. But the optimism that was in the hearts of Americans was contagious. And certainly we had the leaders in place to foment that no matter what, when you read the farewell address of George Washington, it's an address that was full of hope for a nation that had a lot of problems. And just, I think 2 years after that farewell address, Washington was leading troops to Western Pennsylvania to put down the Whiskey Rebellion, right? So Washington wasn't oblivious, but there was a message of hope. And, you know, I look back at our leaders. Why do we hold Reagan at such high ideal? Because he was a message of hope. Yeah, anybody that lived during the 80s knows there were a lot of problems, but he always kept that hope in the front line. Bill Clinton. I mean, I think it was wonderful when he finished his speech, which I think is one of the greatest speeches ever written, when he accepted the nomination, and he ended the speech saying, "I still believe in a place called hope." And that instilling hope in people, seeing that they're as long as we're free, we have the ability to solve problems. We need that again. We don't need leaders that are just talking down the other side and talking about all the problems the other side has created, but leaders that will speak to the hearts of Americans, that there's hope. There's always hope. As long as we're free, there's hope, and we can tackle our problems one day at a time, but with the hope that we will be a free nation. To me, the message of freedom and the message of faith go hand in hand, because faith gives you freedom from yourself and your flaws, and freedom, political civic freedom, gives you freedom from your circumstance, for hope out of your circumstance. And so that has to come back. That has to come back. We need to become a nation of optimism again. Not pie in the sky, not ignoring our problems, but bringing civility back to our rhetoric. You know, a perfect example was yesterday. I think that Representative Alexandria Cortez posted about the stock market and the things that have been going on with the Reddit issues and the hedge funds, and she pointed out a big problem with the current system. And Senator Cruz responded by saying, "I agree." And her response was, "I don't want your agreement. I would feel better if you just went away." That kind of rhetoric is just not, all it does is just further cement the feelings of hatred, the feelings of disgust, the feelings that the other side cannot be worked with, that we've got to beat them until cancel them until there's none left. And that's just not the American way. The American way was George Washington forming a cabinet where Hamilton was the Secretary of the Treasury and Jefferson was the Secretary of State. And those two were the leaders of two separate parties, but they were working to make a government work. Yes, they were fighting to take control. That's just part of politics. But when someone was in power, it was respected. And the ideas were you had a forum for the freedom of ideas to be able to say, you know what, I don't agree with you, and I think you're crazy for thinking that, but you have a right to think it, and more power to you if you can convince everybody else to follow you. And that spirit has been lost. I think that it's not just the national rhetoric. I think that in our universities, where a lot of the learning occurs, I think they're at fault. I mean, I can get on the normal stuff and blame the media, and the media has a contribution to this, no doubt. But I think the problems go deeper. I think they go into our university systems. I think they go into our educational systems. I don't think that we are fomenting that kind of hope and civility. Universities have become the battleground for campus free speech and for the ability to articulate ideas. I think that if a professor today at Harvard espoused any type of conservative ideas, they'd be out the door tomorrow. So that's where I'm thinking. That's where my optimism is. If we could start seeing those kind of changes, advanced citizenship, for me to realize that the freedom of speech doesn't just mean that I get the freedom to say what I think, but I have to respect the person that makes my blood boil. He's got freedom to say what he says. And I'm just afraid that's in danger. Through cancel culture, through so many things that we're facing today. And I know we're on the topic of optimism, so I don't want to end on the pessimistic note. I think on the optimistic note is that if faith is rekindled and and hope through civility is rekindled, we've got a path to the future.
Well, let's hope. Time will tell. Thank you, Mr. Casas, for your time today. Great to speak with you, have your perspective. I know that it'll be very valuable to this project. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for the time.